P.T. Barnum wasn't above bending the truth or straight up lying to make money. He would have approved of his portrayal in The Greatest Showman because the film leaves out or gets wrong many aspects of his life and career, all in the name of entertainment. Here are times The Greatest Showman lied to you. Phineas Taylor Barnum was born in Bethel, Connecticut in 1810. His father, Philo, left nothing to his wife or 5 children when he died. But rather than becoming a street urchin and being forced to steal food as depicted in the film, young Phineas went out looking for a job. When he was 15, Phineas found a job as a store clerk in a nearby town for $1.50 a week and a room with the Wheeler family across the street. The Greatest Showman shows young Barnum falling in love with the daughter of one of Philo's wealthy clients while accompanying his father on a professional consultation to their home. In reality, Barnum met his eventual bride through his landlord. A young lady from Bethel named Charity Hallett had ridden her horse into town one Saturday to purchase a bonnet from Mrs. Wheeler's daughter, who worked as a hat maker. When a violent thunderstorm erupted, Charity was afraid to ride home alone and wondered if the milliner knew a gentleman who could escort her safely. She nominated her mother's lodger, who was already intending to head to Bethel that evening to visit his mother, and it was nearly love at first sight. Barnum and Charity were married 4 years later. P.T. Barnum's career as a showman didn't start with a family-friendly museum as the movie portrays, nor was he the champion of marginalized people that the film made him out to be. In 1834, Barnum discovered an African-American slave named Joyce Heth, alleged to be 161 years old and George Washington's old nursemaid. Barnum got around the fact that slavery had been outlawed in New York by leasing Miss Heth from her owner for $1,000. To make Heth look even older, Barnum restricted her diet until she was nearly skin and bones, then made her perform for up to 14 hours a day. Reports differ on whether Heth earned any wages, but there's no question Barnum took the lion's share of the profits for himself. Eventually, when Heth died, Barnum sold tickets to her autopsy, saying it was of scientific interest to discover how she'd lived so long. The autopsy revealed that Heth had really only been about 80 years old. P.T. Barnum's treatment of Joyce Heth was typical of how people of color fared in his employ. Far from hiring African Americans as performers in their own right, as seen in The Greatest Showman, Barnum played on their differences in order to make better displays of them. One of Barnum's later exhibits was a former cook named William Henry Johnson. According to Benjamin Reese's book, The Showman and the Slave, playbills invited the public to guess what is it and implied that Johnson was a missing link between man and monkey. He wore a fur suit and capered about on stage as a white trainer taught him to walk and use utensils properly. Barnum wasn't above putting on a little blackface himself either. During his later touring days, when his black minstrel had jumped ship, he took it upon himself to perform the songs that had been advertised. This wasn't a one-time deal either, he did it repeatedly. Barnum's poor treatment of people of color should come as no surprise, considering he also confessed to owning slaves when he lived in the South. While running for public office, he was quoted as saying, "I ought to have been whipped 1,000 times for mistreating slaves myself." However, given Barnum's track record, we wouldn't blame you for doubting the sincerity of his regret. The movie shows Barnum pocketing worthless shipping manifests from a fleet of sunken ships as his employers go bankrupt, then using them as collateral to get a bank loan to purchase his museum.
The deed entitled to my entire flotilla of trading vessels.
However, Barnum actually acquired his museum through far different methods. Barnum was keen to acquire the Scudder American Museum Collection, which had been losing money since the founder's death. Francis Olmsted owned the building, and Barnum made a gentleman's agreement with him. Olmsted would buy the collection for $12,000 in 7 payments, and Barnum would repay Olmsted $30,000 over 10 years. But despite agreeing to these terms, the estate manager sold the collection to Peale's Museum Company instead. Barnum was infuriated. He began a letter-writing campaign to all the local newspapers, where he ridiculed Peale's investors and mocked their prospective enterprise. By the time he was done, nobody would touch their stock. Meanwhile, Barnum got it in writing that his original deal would go through if the Peale Group failed to pony up, which is exactly what happened. The Greatest Showman is a musical, so naturally it has song and dance numbers, several of which are shown to be part of Barnum's show. But the actual museum wasn't set up like that at all. Instead, visitors were meant to wander around and visit each of the attractions and displays in turn, then leave. There are only so many people you can safely cram into a wooden building, and it frustrated Barnum to see the crowds at a standstill outside instead of moving in a steady stream in and out. Barnum even opened a door in the back of the building so the exiting customers wouldn't interfere with the ones coming in, but it didn't help. On holidays in particular, people started bringing their lunches in with them, with intentions of staying all day. To keep crowds moving, Barnum instructed his scenery painter to make a large banner and some signs that read, "This way to the egress," and hang them up leading to the rear exit. Curious people saw these signs and, not understanding that egress is simply another word for exit, followed the signs right out of the building. The Greatest Showman shows P.T. Barnum meeting 22-year-old Charles Sherwood Stratton by chance, then persuading him to become his star.
I am putting together a show,
and I need a star.
In reality, Barnum and Stratton were distantly related. To enhance Stratton's natural wit and charm, Barnum taught him how to do impressions of famous people and sing and dance when Stratton was no older than 5. Billed as General Tom Thumb, Stratton soon became nearly as famous as Barnum himself. He began touring with Barnum as a young child, and by all accounts was lively, clever, and an excellent improviser, never at a loss for a quick comeback. Stratton was even given a private audience with Queen Victoria and her children.
Well, you're not exactly reaching the top shelf yourself, sweetheart.
During this tour, Stratton was billed as being 12 years old when he was really 6. As for the rest of Barnum's performers, they didn't get a chance to impress the Queen at all, since Barnum and Stratton were touring Europe alone. The movie lied about that, too. In the movie, Barnum discovers his star performer when he hears her singing while working as a laundress. The reality is that in 1853, P.T. Barnum met and employed a Swiss woman named Josephine Clofolia, who was happy to come work for Barnum. A scandal later erupted when claims were made that she was really a man, thanks to rumors which were likely started by Barnum himself. There was a courtroom hearing to determine the truth. Her husband was called to testify and she was examined by doctors. About 12 years later, Barnum met Annie Jones as a toddler and almost immediately arranged for her to join his museum. He paid her mother $150 a week and allowed her to chaperone her daughter personally until the day she was called home for an emergency. The public was shocked when they learned that Annie had been kidnapped from under the vigilant eye of the nurse who Barnum had hired to safeguard her. Fortunately, she was soon discovered while performing at a church fair, making money for a phrenologist who claimed she was his own daughter. This matter was also settled with an extremely public courtroom hearing. The Greatest Showman depicts a set of conjoined twins as being part of P.T. Barnum's troupe, and he has the reputation of having made the Siamese twins famous. In reality, Chang and Eng Bunker were only a year younger than Barnum, and were already famous long before he found them. When they were young, they toured extensively, performing acrobatics and other feats of athleticism. As they grew older, learned English, and took charge of their own affairs, their shows became more dignified and less like spectacles. They were adept at speaking about politics and stayed up to date on current events. Eventually, they settled down, marrying sisters and raising families on adjacent plantations. They were quite wealthy, but as their families grew in size, so did their financial needs. They found retirement confining and occasionally went back on the road, often taking some of their children with them. While touring in 1860, they made arrangements with Barnum to stay in New York for a month as an exhibit in his museum, and this is the only time they worked together. While the movie depicts her as being in the height of her career when she met Barnum, the real Jenny Lind had actually been retired from opera for a year when she agreed to perform between 80 and 150 shows for Barnum in North America. Barnum's contract with Lind included an escape clause by which she could end their association early by paying him the minimum the remaining shows would have earned. When Lind agreed to tour with Barnum, there were no recordings of her voice and she had never visited America, so Barnum had to drum up publicity for the tour from scratch. He wrote letters to newspapers and advertised to such an extent that 30,000 people were in attendance to meet her ship in New York. It was actually Barnum's flair for publicity that eventually ended their association, not a romance. Lind preferred to keep a low profile when not actually performing, but word would get out about her movements and she would be mobbed by fans everywhere she went. By the 93rd show, she'd had enough. Lind and Barnum had a friendly parting of ways, and Lind toured on her own, with none of the drama that the film depicts.
It will ruin me.
When you're careless with other people, Mr. Barnum, you bring ruin upon yourself.
Despite what he claimed in the film, Lind's departure didn't come close to ruining Barnum. Her total fee had been calculated at $187,500, while Barnum himself reportedly netted $500,000. While the movie makes him out to be integral to Barnum's operation, Barnum's business partner Philip Carlyle is a fictional character, created to serve the Greatest Showman's B-plot love story. Barnum got by on his own reputation just fine throughout most of his career. But eventually, after years spent touring with various attractions and experiencing several serious setbacks, including the museum burning down in 1865 and the new location burning down 3 years later, Barnum got out of show business and into politics. However, in 1870, Barnum was persuaded to come out of retirement by Dan Costello and W.C. Coop in order to run Dan Costello's Great Circus and Egyptian Caravan, which Barnum swiftly turned into P.T. Barnum's Grand Traveling Museum, Menagerie, Caravan, and Hippodrome. Meanwhile, there was a show which was originally called Cooper Bailey and Company's Great International Circus, and later the Great London Circus and Sanger's Royal British Menagerie. Run by James A. Bailey in partnership at various times with either James E. Cooper or James L. Hutchinson, the circus was stiff competition for Barnum. They eventually agreed to form one colossal circus, pooling their resources so that they both benefited. It was known as P.T. Barnum's Greatest Show on Earth, and the Great London Circus combined with Sanger's Royal British Menagerie and Great International Allied Shows, commonly referred to as the Barnum and Bailey Circus. The Ringling Brothers eventually bought Barnum and Bailey in 1909, 20 years after Barnum's death. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.